What is good, my guys and girls of YouTube? Let me turn this off. It is your boy Justin Omoi, and I'm here to talk about both playback settings and exporting settings, which is best and what to use, and I'll explain everything. I'm gonna try and make this as fast as possible for y'all. Options, audio settings. Starting at the top, we have the device. The device is going to be the, of course, audio sound card that you're going to use for the program. If you plan to use recording, of course, go to ASIO. If you do not plan to record, or you're only making beats and you don't really have a audio interface, select direct sound. I highly suggest just staying on the ASIO though. No problem about using ASIO. It's all smooth. Like, look at my vocals here. Yeah. But if I go into like primary sound driver, first of all, you can't even hear me because primary does not use audio inputs, as you see here. Notice it's like unclickable. And also, like, if I hit play, look at that. You don't like that. Let me show you. It sounds good. It sounds good, but the playback, yeah, you might have to tweak around with it. Sometimes it's always a problem to deal with, so go back to ASIO. Sample rate has to do with the amount of sounds that you could capture. Here I have a wave file right here. Let me close that out. So sample rate is going to be these little dots right here, if you can see it. Yeah, you can see it. These dots equal a sample, and this is in stereo, so we have two of them. If I were to select mono, notice it's one. So from the beginning to, alright, whatever, just about. This whole red section that's selected, inside of this selection here, we have 43,000 different dots. Sample rate is going to be the amount of dots that collects the sounds. So if you have a microphone, of course you speak into it, it transduces the audio into these samples that we are collecting via, you know, all the mechanical functions. That being said, the more dots, the better of a resolutional sound you'll hear of your voice. However, 44.1 kilohertz is still enough to hear natural sound, like how I'm speaking here. It sounds natural, of course. If you were to raise this to something like 96 or 192 kilohertz, that will be a bigger capture, of course. But at the same time, it's not really worth it. You don't really hear too much of a difference. Also, something to note, if I use 192 kilohertz, it could lead to a big sound issue, meaning CPU bugging. I'll show you a little clip that I did in my last take. Yeah, hey, Yeah, okay. So as you see, the more sounds we have, the more effects we put in, the more intense the CPU usage will be. I stick to 44.1 because it works nicely with the VSTs. If you want, you could bump it up even to 48 kilohertz. And if you want to be a daredevil, 96,000. That's what studios be using. If you try and select a sound that your device doesn't like, not compatible, notice this little warning sign saying, hey, it can't be set, it's not supported. That means my audio interface doesn't support this. Auto close has to deal with closing down the audio card that you're using for FL Studio. So if you are using an ASIO device, like ASIO for all, if you try playing a YouTube video, for some reason the sound doesn't work, that's because FL Studio has to dedicate the sound device for the program to be able to use the audio for the best capabilities. That being said, if you have this auto close select enabled and you're using the ASIO for all, once you minimize FL Studio, it will disable the audio for FL Studio and enable it back onto the computer. So you could be able to go on YouTube and do your thing, and then once you click back here, it's like, all right, back to reality. Here we have the ASIO panel for the Focusrite Scarlett 2i4 second generation that I'm using. The sample rate here, even if you click it like 92, it goes back to 44.1 because this is the slave, or this is the host right here, and this is technically the slave in this case. But buffer size, this has to deal with the milliseconds here. So I could raise it up to like this one. Yo. It's kind of like laggy. If I were to put this, yo. You hear that double? That's because I had my mix sound. But anyways, if I were to drop it down, 16, soon as I'm speaking, I hear myself. The lower you go, the less latency you will have, but the more chances of buffers or underruns, these little clicky sounds you may have. Let me go ahead and hit play. Let's see if I get an issue. You hear those clicks? Maybe if I even speak while I am doing this. Yeah, hear it, you hear it, yeah, yeah, nasty, clicking, sounds, I don't like it, don't fuck around, yow, yeah, we don't want that. Find a spot that fits best or feels best for you in terms of playback and recording. For me, I like using 512 even though it's a little later. Mix and buffer switch and triple buffer has to deal with when you are in like a critical mode where the CPU is just, I can't deal with it. Mix and buffer switch will basically mix in the ASIO with the output in terms of playing out, of course. It will probably help you some. It'll double your latency though. So the way I'm speaking now, it'll probably be longer. Of course, it's not going to be an issue because I don't have 100 CPU going on right now. Same thing with triple buffer, except it's like tripling, buffering ahead as it says up there. Priority has to deal with the amount that the CPU or the audio interface will deal. The higher you go, the more, cleaner you'll be. If you're not sure, just put highest. It's always good. Safe overload will be like, hey program, don't be a prick. Don't freeze up. Don't be annoying. Playback tracking has to deal with synchronization for tracking. I select mixer. That way we'll have a good playback here. Notice the green right here. If I select driver, notice it's bugging out. Hybrid is in middle. Hybrid's like in the middle between the driver and the mixer. Driver has to be the sound driver, which is, again, the audio interface. Offset has to do with tracking. I won't really have a problem with it. Keep it in the middle. For if some reason your playback is over, you can select the offset and it'll deal with that. Multi-thread generator and mixer processing. This has to deal with having different cores of your CPU processor doing different pieces of works for the generator. So for example, if I have Nexus, is this Nexus? Yeah, if I have it working, the processors will be split up into two. Or the processes, my bad, will be split up into two different processors. And by doing that, it'll help the CPU have a better performance because we got more room to play around with. Mixer processing has to do with the effects in the mixer, auto-tune, reverb, compression, you name it. Smart disable will be like, hey, when the sound's not working or using its effect, disable it. Don't work it. Like if I were to play Nexus and then the sound decays and dies out, it'll be like, hey, disable it or don't use it. This is all to help the processing of your computer work out better. Align tick lengths has to deal with your VST if you are getting buffer clicker issues, you're getting and stuff like that. Clicking this is basically running like a troubleshooting sound. Oh, it says up there. It's running I guess you could say a quick way of fixing the issue for the VST. Last but not least, in the mixer section, this is going to be the quality that you're going to be hearing when it's through playback. So if you don't care too much about the quality when playing back, you could leave it on, I believe it was 24 point sync. But because we want the best quality sound for playback, we select 512, or I select that. And that's basically giving it more work to read in and give you back out. Notice it says higher the quality is slowest, low quality is fastest. That has to deal with playback. Preview mixer track has to deal with the sounds that are being previewed. So if I were to play a metronome, notice the metronome is in insert 1. This is because it's the playback. Playback also refers to this. Notice 1 is being pressed. If I were to switch it to 2, it'll play in the Omni. And so forth. Or if I were to put on 4. And having dashes is just a master. I like using 1 so we could have the metronome and then I could lower it down. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Play truncated notes on transport has to deal with the performance mode side. It basically cuts out the sounds. Play note crossing start position. Yeah, it's helpful to cut out sounds for performance mode. I believe on default it's left on, so leave it on. Reset plugins on transport, no. Alright, and that concludes the output part for playback. Let's go ahead and talk about exporting. So to export, I'm going to do Control R. On desktop, I'm going to name this, I don't know, Tutorial 1. And I hit enter, but I forgot I could show you the drop down window. There's things like WAV file, MP3, OGG file, FLAC, and I believe MID, which should be MIDI. The two main outputs you probably would care about is WAV and MP3. Let's start with MP3 since that's the universal thing you'll probably want to deal with. MP3 bitrate has to deal with the bitrate, of course, which is the playback, kilobytes per second. The lower the bitrate, the more, I guess you could say, retro it will sound. Let me go ahead and put it on 64 KB, his start. Alright, and if I were to go into here and drop this in, I'm going to go ahead and find that file that I named Tutorial 1. Tutorial 1. And I'm going to go ahead and hit playback. Notice it sounds washed out. And it's so squashed down to the around 11,000 hertz. If you could look at the top left there under tools, it says around 11,000. Control Shift R. And since we're here, the save type, notice I hold Control Shift and press R, and now it says MP3. That's the best shortcut. But there's also other files you could do, like FLP.zip, which is to have your whole folder saved. WAV, MP3, OGG, all that. Direct wave instrument. Never dealt with that in my life. Back to the MP3 bitrate. What's a good bitrate to set it on? Nowadays, 320 kbps is usually the norm, the amazing thing to set it on, because it's the highest of the quality we'll be able to capture. Back in the day, it used to be around 128 KB per second. This is to save space, and of course, back then playback wasn't that best, but 128 kilobytes per second is still acceptable in terms of hearing. Let me go ahead and export that. Notice 128, we got around 16. I would say at most around 18 kilohertz. That's still a good playback. Let me go ahead and hit play. It's still good to hear. It's not as choppy or shoddy as the first sample I showed you at like 64. But just know that this was the CD playback quality back then. We could go even higher, as high as 320, and have most of the sound, you know, being dealt with. Okay, and look at how high this is in comparison to the other one. So if I were to bring the other one up, you'll see. But notice the highest peak up here is 20,000 kilohertz, or 20,000 hertz, aka 20 kilohertz. I'm gonna hit play. So you can hear it's way big of a definition. And for comparison, here is the 128 kilohertz and then the 320. Notice it is doubled, but sounds lower in the 320, but that's because we have more work frequencies to deal with, where this one is more a little squishy. You can see over here in the OGGs, it does have a higher KB per second, but we don't really have to deal with OGG files. I believe OGG files is like computer files, game files, sound files. I don't know, but MP3 is going to be the universal thing we're going to be dealing with. Next would be the WAV, and the WAV simply, which bit do you want to deal with? Of course, if you're recording with 16 bits and whatever, and you're trying to export a 32-bit float, nothing really would change. It's going to be 16-bit. Of course, if you use VST sounds and they're like high quality, it'll probably be 24s. Usually with this, it's best to set the bit depth that you're using to record. For me, it'll be 24. For others, it may be 16. Either way, when you export or compress to MP3, it will be 16-bit in the end. If you're exporting a wave so you could be able to master the sound, do 24 if you wish, or 16 if you want to compress the sounds down and then have the mastering process be done. Some people do say it's better to have it 16-bit to be able to hear better on it, but depends on you. And of course, the higher the bit depth, the higher the file size equals the more definition you'll have. Quality, this is going to be the time and amount of work it does on the sound while it's doing this thing, aka the resampling. The higher the better. Same thing I explained before. I'm doing 512. It'll take a little bit longer, of course, to export, but that is not a problem if you want the highest quality. HQ for all plugins, of course. Disable maximum polyphony. Yeah, do it. Dithering, you can see it's not really highlighted. But on 16, you see it's enabled. Dithering on its own is a very weird thing or complicated thing to explain. But if I were to put it into one sentence, it would be to help the export sound be better. If you don't want to get too into it, just know enable dithering in the end. Good story, happy story, everyone will be done. Last but not least, miscellaneous options here. Safe slice markers. This has to deal with markers used inside the program. So if you do have a marker set, like markers set inside of a sound. So if you were to make like a drum loop, you could create markers in Edison. So let me see. I can't pull it up here. Let me add marker or something. That. Let's drag it down here. Bam, just like that. That same little marker thing, if you were to add it in there and export it, it will create those or save those files in it. That being said, if you were to drag the sound into the program, it will have these markers shown so you could be able to slice the sounds wherever it is and deal with it easier. Even some settings like I believe the mode setting is it'll like deal with it. It'll have a preset. Split mixer track has to deal with when you're using a WAV file. If I were to select split mixer track, notice the disk space will be ginormous. So it went from let's see, 1, 2, 3, a 4-digit thing to like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-digit number. Just know it's splitting all these sounds here into its individual track. So we would have around 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 different track files. This is something used for sending stems over or split tracks over, whichever one you want to call it. So people could mix and master and work with the sounds. Trim PDC delay has to deal with the plugin delay compensation, as I spoke before with the clocks. This is going to be something that you would want to leave on, especially when you're exporting a WAV file, because when it's in a WAV file and you export and you have this selected off, it will be delayed in your export. You may find it weird sounding. Selecting this will be like, hey, latency 0, fix it. So as soon as you export it, it's good. If you're not sure, just leave it on. Lastly, enable master effect and enable insert effects have to deal with these effects here. These are inserts, and master is going to be the master here. If you want to export just a mixed WAV file, you could deselect the master if you have mastering plugins on, and it'll be a mix. If you want to disable these, have it raw, that's an option. Of course, start is going to start the export, and background rendering is going to minimize FL Studio to export the file. If it's a large file, you'll be thankful you clicked it. You can still click it even after you click start. But that is basically it when it comes to the sound quality, to have the best sound quality for playback and for exporting. Thank you guys and girls for watching. Thumbs up if this helps. Share it to a buddy who uses FL Studio. Tag him in the comments or whatever. That doesn't even work. My name is Justin Omoi, and with that being said, peace. I'm out.